Hook, in a world where royal families are often hidden behind palace walls and carefully curated public appearances, one moment changed everything. As the clock struck midnight on a cold December night, millions of fans across the globe had no idea that they were about to receive a gift that would melt their hearts and bring tears of joy to their eyes. The Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Catherine, were about to do something unexpected. Something beautiful. Something that would remind the entire world why this family has captured the hearts of billions. This is not just a story about photographs. This is a story about love, survival, hope, and the unbreakable bonds that hold a family together through the darkest of times. When you see these images, you will understand. When you read their story, you will believe in fairy tales again. Because sometimes, the greatest royal treasures are not crowns or jewels. They are the simple, precious moments of a family that refuses to let anything break them apart. The year had been nothing short of extraordinary. Not extraordinary in the glittering, glamorous way that people often imagine when they think of royal life. No, this had been a year of tests, trials, and tribulations that would have broken most families. But William and Catherine were not most families. They had weathered storms that would have capsized lesser vessels, and somehow, someway, they had emerged not just intact, but stronger than ever before. Catherine sat in the warm glow of her living room at Adelaide Cottage, the family's beloved home on the Windsor Castle estate. The Christmas decorations sparkled in the soft evening light, and the smell of pine needles mixed with the gentle aroma of hot chocolate that one of the children had left half-finished on the coffee table. It was the kind of peaceful domestic scene that she had dreamed about during the long, difficult months of her cancer treatment. Back then, when she was lying in hospital beds and fighting through the grueling effects of chemotherapy, she had held on to moments like this in her mind like precious jewels. William walked into the room, his footsteps quiet on the thick carpet. He carried his phone in his hand, and there was a look on his face that Catherine had come to recognize over their many years together. It was the look he got when he was plotting something. When he had an idea that he was excited about but was trying to keep contained until the right moment. She smiled at him from her position curled up on the sofa, a soft cashmere blanket draped over her legs. Even now, months after she had announced her remission, she still got tired more easily than before. But it was a different kind of tired. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of treatment. Just the normal tiredness of a mother of 3 energetic children during the Christmas holiday season. William sat down beside her, and, for a moment, neither of them spoke. They had learned during the past year to treasure these quiet moments together. When you came face to face with your own mortality, as Catherine had, you learned to appreciate the simple act of sitting beside the person you loved most in the world. The children were upstairs in their rooms. Prince George, at 12 years old, was growing into such a thoughtful young man. He had been her rock during her illness, even though he was still so young. William had told her stories of how George would ask about her every morning, how he would insist on making her tea when she was feeling unwell, how he had taken on the role of big brother with even more seriousness than before. Princess Charlotte, at 10, had shown a maturity beyond her years as well. She had a way of knowing exactly when her mother needed a hug, when she needed to laugh, when she needed to be left alone with her thoughts. Charlotte had inherited the best of both her parents. She had William's quiet strength and Catherine's natural grace. She also had a personality that was entirely her own, fierce and confident and full of life. And then, there was Prince Louis, the youngest at 7, who had remained blissfully unaware of just how serious his mother's condition had been. William and Catherine had worked hard to protect all 3 children, but, especially Louis, from the full weight of what their family was facing. Louis was still at that beautiful age where he believed that everything would always be okay, where he trusted completely in the adults around him to keep him safe. And his parents had done everything in their power to preserve that innocence. Now, as William settled beside her on the sofa, Catherine could see that mischievous glint in his eyes more clearly. She raised an eyebrow at him in that way she had perfected over the years. It was a look that said she knew he was up to something and that he had better spill the beans immediately. William laughed softly. It was a good sound, his laughter. There had been months when she had not heard it nearly enough. When the weight of worry had pressed down on him so heavily that joy seemed like a distant memory. But now, in the warmth of their home, with their children safe and healthy upstairs and Catherine's cancer in remission, laughter came more easily again. He handed her his phone without saying a word. On the screen was a collection of photographs. 12 of them, to be exact. One for each month of the year that was now coming to a close. Catherine looked at the images, and, slowly, a smile spread across her face. These were not the polished, professional photographs that the world usually saw of the royal family. These were candid moments. Real moments. Moments that captured the truth of their lives in a way that formal portraits never could. There was a photograph from January, when they had commemorated Holocaust Memorial Day together. Both she and William looked somber in the image, as befitting the occasion, but there was something in their clasped hands that spoke of unity and shared purpose. Another photograph showed the chaos and joy of trooping the color in June. Behind the scenes, away from the crowds, King Charles was caught in a candid moment with Princess Anne and William. All three of them were smiling at something off camera, and the image radiated the warmth of family even in the midst of official duties. There was a beautiful shot from Wimbledon, where Catherine had presented the trophy to the winner, Jannik Sinner. She remembered that day clearly. It had been one of her first major public appearances after completing treatment, and she had been nervous about whether she would have the energy to get through it. But, the moment she stepped onto the familiar grounds of the tennis club, she had felt a surge of joy that had carried her through the entire event. One photograph that made Catherine's breath catch in her throat showed William playing beach volleyball in Brazil, ahead of the Earthshot Prize ceremony. He was mid-jump, sand flying around him, his face split in a wide grin. He looked so happy, so carefree, so much like the young man she had fallen in love with all those years ago at university. But, perhaps the photograph that touched her most was not one of herself or William alone. It was the image of William and their eldest son, George, speaking with veterans at a tea party marking the 80th anniversary of VE Day. George looked so grown up in the picture, so serious as he listened to the stories of those who had served their country. She could see so much of William in him. The way he held himself, the way he gave his full attention to the person in front of him. But she could also see hints of herself, of her own family, in the gentleness of his expression. She scrolled through the rest of the photographs, taking her time with each one. There was William meeting with world leaders, Catherine visiting with communities who had touched her heart, moments from their work with various charities and organizations. And there, at the end of the slideshow, was an image that made her laugh out loud. William at the Welsh Guard Christmas party, a pint of beer in his hand, surrounded by soldiers, his face lit up with genuine joy. He looked nothing like the future king in that moment. He looked like any other person having a wonderful time with friends. She looked up at him now, her husband of so many years, and felt a wave of love wash over her. These photographs, she realized, told the story of their year. Not the sanitized, carefully managed version that the palace press office would release. The real version. The one that showed them as human beings, not just as royals. The one that showed the lighter moments, the moments of connection, the moments that made all the difficult parts worthwhile. William was watching her reaction carefully, still not speaking, letting her process what she was seeing. Finally, Catherine handed the phone back to him and snuggled closer to his side. The idea formed between them without either of them having to say it out loud. They had always been good at that, at communicating without words. It was something they had developed over their years together, first as university friends, then as a couple, then as spouses and parents. There were some things that did not need to be spoken to be understood. They would share these photographs with the world. It was a departure from the usual royal protocol. The palace typically released carefully selected, professionally shot images that presented the family in their official capacity. But William and Catherine had learned something important during the past year. They had learned that authenticity mattered more than perfection. They had learned that people connected not with the image of royalty, but with the reality of humanity. When Catherine had released her video announcing that she had completed chemotherapy, she had spoken from the heart. She had not hidden behind formal language or stiff presentations. She had shared her vulnerability, her fear, her gratitude. And the response from the public had been overwhelming. People that connected with her honesty in a way that no amount of polished public relations could have achieved. These New Year photographs would be another step in that direction. They would show the world that the Prince and Princess of Wales were not untouchable figures on a pedestal. They were a husband and wife, a mother and father, two people who had faced one of the greatest challenges of their lives and had emerged with their love and their family intact. William pulled out his phone again and began typing. They would share the photographs with a simple message. Not a formal statement from the palace. Just a heartfelt wish for the new year, accompanied by some of their favorite unseen moments from the year that was ending. As he typed, Catherine rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. She thought about how far they had come since those early days at St. Andrew's University, when they had been just two young people finding their way in the world. She thought about their wedding day, when billions of people had watched them exchange vows in Westminster Abbey. She thought about the births of their three children, each one a miracle that had filled her heart to overflowing. And she thought about the year just past. The January morning when her abdominal surgery had been scheduled. The February days when she had recovered at home, not yet knowing what lay ahead. The March moment when she had learned that cancer had been present after all, that she would need chemotherapy. The long months of treatment, of feeling sick and weak and afraid. The September day when she had finally been able to announce that the treatment was complete. And then, just weeks ago, the even more wonderful news that she was officially in remission. Through all of it, William had been there. He had held her hand during the worst nights. He had juggled his royal duties with his responsibilities as a husband and father. He had shielded their children from the worst of it while still being honest with them about what was happening. He had been, as he always was, her strength and her support. She opened her eyes and looked at him again. He was still focused on his phone, crafting the message that would accompany their photographs. His brow was furrowed in concentration, and she could see him taking care with each word. He understood, just as she did, that this was not just a social media post. This was a communication with millions of people who had prayed for them, worried about them, and celebrated with them throughout the difficult year. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made both of them look up. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her hair slightly disheveled from whatever game she had been playing upstairs. She looked at her parents, and then at the phone in her father's hand, and a knowing smile crossed her face. Charlotte was old enough now to understand more about their public role, about the way their family life was shared with the world. She had seen the photographers outside events, had noticed the news coverage of their activities, had heard her parents discuss the balance between privacy and duty. And, in her own way, she had come to accept it as a normal part of her life. She came over to the sofa and squeezed in between her parents, looking at the photographs on the screen. When she saw the image of her father playing volleyball on the beach, she giggled. When she saw the picture of George with the veterans, she grew more serious. When she saw the final image of William at the Christmas party, she declared that he looked very silly with that big smile. William pretended to be offended, which made Charlotte laugh even harder. Catherine watched the two of them with a full heart. These were the moments that mattered. Not the crowns and the palaces and the formal occasions. These quiet evenings at home, these shared jokes, these simple expressions of love and connection. Eventually, Charlotte went back upstairs to join her brothers, and William and Catherine returned to their task. They finalized the selection of photographs, approved the message that would accompany them, and set everything up to be posted at midnight on New Year's Eve. It felt right, Catherine thought, to begin the new year by looking back at the one that was ending. To acknowledge all that they had been through while also celebrating all that they had achieved. To share a glimpse of their real lives with the people who had supported them so faithfully. The days leading up to New Year's Eve passed in a blur of family activity. There were games to play and meals to share and presents to enjoy. There were quiet walks on the grounds of the Windsor estate, where the winter air was crisp and clean and the ancient trees stood like sentinels against the gray sky. Louis had received a new bicycle for Christmas and was determined to master it before the new year. William spent hours outside with him, running alongside as Louis wobbled and weaved down the paths. Catherine watched from the window, wrapped in a warm coat, laughing at Louis's expressions of triumph each time he managed to go a few feet without falling. George, meanwhile, had received several books about history and geography, which he devoured with the same intensity that William had shown at his age. He was developing a deep interest in the world around him, in the stories of people and places that made up the tapestry of human civilization. Catherine sometimes found him curled up in a quiet corner, completely absorbed in some tale of adventure or discovery. Charlotte was in her element during the holiday season. She loved the decorations, the music, the special foods, the sense of magic that hung in the air. She organized games for her brothers, helped in the kitchen when the staff would allow it, and practiced her ballet moves in front of anyone who would watch. She had an energy and enthusiasm that was infectious, and even on Catherine's most tired days, Charlotte's joy lifted her spirits. The family also spent time with the extended royal family, gathering at Sandringham for some of the traditional Christmas celebrations. It was good to see everyone, Catherine thought. Good to be reminded that they were part of something larger than just their immediate family. Good to connect with the aunts and uncles and cousins who made up the complex web of royal relations. King Charles had been especially attentive during the gatherings. He, too, had faced his own health challenges during the year, having been diagnosed with cancer just weeks after Catherine's diagnosis had been announced. The two of them had a new understanding now, a bond forged in the shared experience of fighting an illness that had threatened to take so much from them. Charles had told Catherine privately that he admired her strength. She had told him the same thing in return. Neither of them had sought the role of being a public face for cancer patients, but both of them had embraced it in their own ways. They had spoken openly about their journeys, had connected with others who were going through similar experiences, had used their platforms to raise awareness and support for treatment and research. It was Queen Camilla who pulled Catherine aside during one of the Sandringham gatherings, her eyes warm with affection. Camilla understood, perhaps better than most, what it meant to be a woman navigating the pressures of royal life while also trying to be a mother and a wife. She had faced her own challenges over the years, had learned her own lessons about resilience and grace under pressure. And she had become a source of quiet support for Catherine, offering advice and comfort without ever being intrusive. Camilla asked Catherine how she was really doing. Not the polished answer that Catherine might give to a reporter or a well-meaning stranger. The real answer, the one that acknowledged the complexity of recovering from illness while also returning to public duties. Catherine took a moment before responding. She was doing well, she said. Better than she had expected, in many ways. But it was still a process. She still had days when the fatigue caught up with her, when her body reminded her of everything it had been through. She still had moments of anxiety, of worry about whether the cancer might return. She had learned to take things one day at a time, to focus on what was in front of her rather than what might lie ahead. Camilla nodded, understanding completely. She gave Catherine's hand a gentle squeeze and told her that she was proud of her. That the whole family was proud of her. That she had handled an impossible situation with more grace than anyone could have expected. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. She had cried enough during the past year. Now was the time for gratitude and hope, not for sadness. As New Year's Eve approached, the family returned to their own home to celebrate the turning of the year in their own way. William and Catherine had decided that they wanted this night to be intimate, just the five of them together as a family. There would be other celebrations later, other occasions for gathering with the wider royal family. But this night was for them. They ordered pizza, much to the children's delight. It was not exactly traditional royal fare, but William and Catherine had always tried to give their children experiences that were as normal as possible. Pizza and a movie marathon seemed like the perfect way to ring in a new year. Louis was the first to fall asleep, worn out from his bicycle adventures and the excitement of the holiday season. Charlotte lasted a bit longer, but eventually her eyes grew heavy and she curled up under a blanket on the other end of the sofa. George made it all the way to 11 o'clock before he, too, succumbed to sleep. William and Catherine found themselves alone in the quiet living room, their children sleeping peacefully around them. The television was playing softly in the background, showing the celebrations taking place around the world as different time zones crossed into the new year. Catherine checked the time on her phone. Just 30 minutes until midnight in London. Just 30 minutes until their photographs would be shared with the world. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, which surprised her. After all these years in the public eye, after all the scrutiny and attention, she had thought she was immune to such feelings. But sharing these personal photographs felt different. More vulnerable, somehow. More real. William seemed to sense her thoughts because he reached over and took her hand. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture so familiar and comforting that she felt herself relax. He reminded her that they did not have to share the photographs if she did not want to. It was not too late to change their minds. They could post a simple New Year's greeting instead, as they had done in years past. But Catherine shook her head. She wanted to share them. She wanted the world to see these moments of joy and connection. She wanted people to know that despite everything they had been through, their family was strong and united and happy. And, besides, she added with a small smile, the photograph of William playing beach volleyball was too good not to share. William laughed, the sound filling the quiet room. He had been slightly embarrassed when he first saw that photograph, aware of how different it was from his usual public image. But Catherine loved it. She loved seeing him carefree and active, doing something just for the fun of it rather than because it was expected of him. The minutes ticked by. Outside, they could hear distant sounds of celebration from the surrounding areas. Fireworks were beginning to go off somewhere, their bright bursts of color visible through the windows. At 1 minute to midnight, George stirred and opened his eyes. He looked around, confused for a moment, and then smiled when he realized where he was and what was happening. He sat up, careful not to disturb his sleeping sister, and moved closer to his parents. The three of them watched the clock on William's phone count down the final seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then, it was a new year. William and Catherine kissed softly, a tradition they had maintained since their first New Year's Eve together as a couple, back when they were still university students with no idea of the life that lay ahead of them. George, at 12, made a show of looking away and pretending to be disgusted by his parents' display of affection. But Catherine could see the smile he was trying to hide. She knew that despite his protestations, George found comfort in seeing his parents so obviously in love. A few minutes after midnight, William picked up his phone and checked the post that had automatically gone live. The photographs were now out in the world, accompanied by their message wishing everyone a happy new year and thanking people for their support during what had been a brilliant year despite its challenges. The response was immediate. Within minutes, the likes and comments began pouring in. People from all over the world were seeing these glimpses into the Wales family's year, and they were responding with warmth and enthusiasm. Catherine did not spend long looking at the comments. She had learned over the years to protect her mental health by limiting her exposure to social media. But even in the brief time she spent scrolling, she could see the love that was flowing toward their family. People were touched by the candid nature of the photographs. They were moved by the evidence of happiness despite hardship. They were celebrating along with the Wales family as one year ended and another began. She handed the phone back to William and leaned against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. George had fallen asleep again, this time with his head resting on the arm of the sofa. Charlotte and Louis were still out cold, their peaceful faces illuminated by the soft glow of the dying embers in the fireplace. This, Catherine thought, was what mattered. Not the comments on social media. Not the newspaper headlines that would appear in the morning. Not the analysis of body language experts or the speculation of royal commentators. This moment, right here. Her family, together and safe and loved. The knowledge that they had survived the hardest year of their lives and had come out the other side. The hope that the year ahead would bring healing and joy and new adventures. She closed her eyes and let the warmth of the moment wash over her. Tomorrow, she would wake up to a new year full of possibilities. There would be royal duties to resume, public appearances to make, charitable work to continue. There would be challenges to face and obstacles to overcome. There would be days when she felt strong and days when she felt tired. There would be moments of triumph and moments of struggle.
But there would also be moments like this one.
Quiet moments in the heart of her family, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world. Moments that reminded her why she had chosen this life, why she had fallen in love with a man who happened to be a prince, why she had embraced the responsibilities and the privileges that came with her role. As she drifted toward sleep, still curled up against William on the sofa, Catherine smiled. The photographs that were now circulating around the world were more than just images. They were proof of survival. They were evidence of resilience. They were a message of hope to everyone who was facing their own battles, their own challenges, their own uncertain futures. If the Prince and Princess of Wales could emerge from the darkness of cancer with their love intact and their family stronger than ever, then perhaps anyone could. Perhaps there was always hope, even in the darkest times. Perhaps there was always a reason to keep fighting, keep believing, keep holding on to the people and the moments that mattered most. The new year had begun. And, for William and Catherine and their 3 beautiful children, it was already full of promise. The morning after New Year's Eve dawned gray and cold over the Windsor estate. A thin mist hung in the air, giving the ancient trees and manicured gardens an almost magical quality, as if the whole world had been wrapped in cotton wool overnight. Catherine woke slowly, the remnants of peaceful sleep still clinging to her consciousness. She found herself in her own bed, though she had no clear memory of how she had gotten there. William must have carried her, or at least guided her upstairs, after she had fallen asleep on the sofa. It was the kind of thing he would do, quiet and caring, taking care of her without making a fuss about it. The bed beside her was empty, but still warm, which meant William had not been up for long. She could hear distant sounds from somewhere in the house. The padding of small feet. The murmur of voices. The clatter of something in the kitchen. The ordinary symphony of a household waking up, the music that she had missed so desperately during her months of treatment when every sound had seemed muffled and far away. Catherine stretched slowly, feeling the pleasant ache of a good night's sleep in her muscles. Her body was still healing, still recovering from the assault of chemotherapy, but each day brought small improvements. She could feel her strength returning, bit by bit, like a plant pushing its way toward the sunlight after a long winter. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, and her eyes widened when she saw the notifications. Thousands of them. From every social media platform, from news outlets, from well-wishers around the world. The photographs they had posted at midnight had clearly struck a chord with people. She scrolled through some of the reactions, a smile playing on her lips. People were calling the images heartwarming, genuine, beautiful. They were commenting on how happy the family looked, how real and relatable they seemed despite their royal status. They were sharing their own stories of survival and hope, inspired by Catherine's public journey through cancer. There were, of course, the inevitable negative comments. There always were. Some people would find fault no matter what the royal family did. But Catherine had learned over the years to let those voices wash over her without penetrating too deeply. She focused instead on the overwhelming wave of love and support that was pouring in from every corner of the globe. She was still scrolling when William appeared in the doorway, carrying a cup of tea. His hair was slightly disheveled, and he was wearing the old university sweatshirt that he refused to throw away despite its numerous holes and stains. He looked so ordinary in that moment, so far removed from the polished prince that the world usually saw. She loved him like this. Relaxed and real and entirely himself. He crossed to the bed and handed her the tea, then sat down beside her and looked at the phone screen. His eyebrows rose when he saw the numbers. The post was breaking records for engagement. People were not just liking and commenting. They were sharing, discussing, creating their own content in response. Catherine showed him some of her favorite comments. A cancer survivor in Australia who said the photographs gave her hope for her own recovery. A father in Canada who said seeing William with George reminded him to spend more time with his own son. A young girl in the United Kingdom who said she wanted to be just like Princess Charlotte when she grew up. William was quiet for a long moment, taking it all in. Then, he looked at Catherine with an expression she knew well. It was the look he got when he was deeply moved but trying not to show it too much. He was still, after all these years, not entirely comfortable with public displays of emotion. It was something he had inherited from his grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth, who had believed that royals should maintain a certain reserve. But Catherine had slowly helped him open up over the years. She had shown him that vulnerability was not weakness, that sharing genuine emotion could be a gift to others. And, now, looking at the response to their photographs, he could see the proof of that truth playing out on a global scale. Downstairs, breakfast was already underway. The children had woken early, as children do, and had made their way to the kitchen where the household staff were preparing the first meal of the new year. Louis was still in his pajamas, his hair sticking up at impossible angles, enthusiastically spreading jam on toast with more on his face than on the bread. Charlotte was helping pour juice, taking her responsibilities very seriously. George was reading something on his tablet, probably the news coverage of the photographs, though he was trying to pretend he was not interested. When William and Catherine appeared, the children looked up with varying degrees of excitement. Louis immediately launched into a description of a dream he had had the night before, something involving dinosaurs and spaceships and his bicycle. Charlotte wanted to know if she could see the comments on the photographs. George asked casually if anyone had mentioned him specifically. Catherine gathered Louis into a hug, jam and all, and pressed a kiss to the top of his unruly hair. She loved this age, when he was still young enough to be purely and genuinely himself without any self-consciousness. She knew it would not last forever. Already, at 12, George was developing the awareness that came with growing up. He understood now that people were watching him, analyzing his every move, speculating about his future. It was changing him in subtle ways that broke Catherine's heart even as she recognized their inevitability. The family sat down to breakfast together, a tradition that Catherine and William had fought hard to maintain despite the demands of their royal schedules. Meals together were sacred time, moments when they could be just a family without the weight of public expectations. They talked about nothing and everything, the way families do. Louis's bicycle adventures. Charlotte's plans for the new year. George's thoughts on a book he had been reading. William's upcoming engagements. Catherine's hopes for returning to more public duties in the months ahead. After breakfast, the children scattered to their various activities, and William and Catherine found themselves alone in the quiet kitchen. The staff had tactfully withdrawn, giving them privacy. It was one of the things Catherine appreciated most about their household. The staff understood when to be present and when to disappear, how to support without intruding. William was looking at his phone again, scrolling through the media coverage of their New Year's post. The major newspapers had picked up the story, of course. There were articles analyzing each photograph, speculating about when and where they had been taken, commenting on what they revealed about the Wales family's year. One article in particular caught his attention. It was a piece about the decision to share only one photograph featuring the children. Royal commentators were noting that while George appeared in the image with the veterans, Charlotte and Louis were conspicuously absent from the selection. Some were praising this as evidence of William and Catherine's commitment to protecting their younger children's privacy. Others were speculating about deeper meanings and hidden messages. Catherine read the article over William's shoulder and shook her head with a small smile. The truth was much simpler than the commentators imagined. They had chosen photographs that represented their official duties, their work, their public roles. The pictures of their children, the ones that showed Charlotte and Louis being their playful, wonderful selves, were too precious and private to share. Those moments belonged to the family alone. It was a balance they were constantly trying to strike. On one hand, they understood that the public had a legitimate interest in the royal family, that their visibility was part of their role and their value to the nation. On the other hand, they were parents first, and they would always prioritize their children's well-being over public curiosity. George was different, William explained to the journalists who sometimes asked about these choices. George was second in line to the throne. His destiny was set in a way that Charlotte and Louis's were not. He needed to be prepared for a life of public service, which meant gradually introducing him to public life in a controlled and supportive way. The photograph with the veterans had been part of that process, a small step in his education as a future king. But Charlotte and Louis had more freedom. They would support the monarchy, certainly, but they would not carry its heaviest burdens.
William and Catherine wanted to give them as much normal childhood as possible, for as long as possible. There would be time enough for public duties when they were older.
The day after New Year's passed in a pleasant blur of family activities. The weather improved enough for them to venture outside, and William took the children for a long walk around the estate while Catherine rested and read. She was still building up her stamina, still learning to pace herself after the months of treatment. William never made her feel guilty about needing rest. He simply picked up whatever she could not carry and kept moving forward. In the afternoon, Catherine felt strong enough to join the family for a visit to the stables. All three children loved horses, a passion that ran through both sides of their family. George was becoming quite a competent rider, approaching the activity with the same quiet determination he brought to everything. Charlotte was fearless on horseback, urging her pony to go faster and jump higher with infectious enthusiasm. Louis was still learning, but he was eager and unafraid, qualities that served him well in many areas of life. Catherine watched her children with their horses and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. There had been moments during her treatment when she had feared she might not live to see them grow up. When the nights were long and dark and the side effects of chemotherapy made every moment a struggle, she had held onto images of her children's faces like talismans against despair. Now, here she was, standing in the weak winter sunlight, watching Louis attempt to convince his pony that carrots were worth the effort of a short walk. She was alive. She was healing. And she had so much to look forward to. William appeared at her side, his arm sliding around her waist in a gesture so natural and familiar that she barely registered it.
He did not say anything. He did not need to.
He simply stood there with her, watching their children, sharing the moment. That evening, after the children were in bed, William and Catherine sat down to review their schedules for the coming months. It was not the most romantic way to spend an evening, but it was necessary. Catherine's return to public duties would need to be carefully managed, balancing her desire to work with her need to continue recovering. The calendar was full of events and engagements, some already confirmed and others still in negotiation. There were charity visits and official ceremonies, foreign trips and domestic tours, meetings with dignitaries and conversations with ordinary citizens. The scope of their work never failed to amaze Catherine, even after all these years. The royal family touched so many aspects of national life, representing the country at home and abroad, supporting thousands of organizations and causes, providing continuity and stability in a constantly changing world. Catherine identified the engagements that mattered most to her, the ones she wanted to prioritize as she resumed her public role. Her work with young children and families had always been close to her heart. She had spent years learning about early childhood development, understanding how the first 5 years of life shaped everything that came after. She wanted to continue that work, to use her platform to advocate for better support for parents and children. She was also deeply committed to supporting other cancer patients. Her own experience had given her a new understanding of what it meant to face the diagnosis, to endure treatment, to navigate the long road of recovery. She had connected with patients and survivors during her treatment, had heard their stories and shared their fears. She wanted to use her visibility to raise awareness, to reduce stigma, to ensure that everyone facing cancer had access to the care and support they needed. William listened as she outlined her priorities, nodding along, occasionally asking questions or offering suggestions. He had his own areas of focus, of course. Mental health remained a central concern for him, building on the work he had done with his brother Harry years earlier through the Heads Together campaign. He was also deeply invested in environmental causes, particularly through the Earthshot Prize, which recognized and rewarded innovative solutions to the world's most pressing environmental challenges. Their work complemented each other's, Catherine reflected. William focused on the big picture issues, the global challenges that required systemic solutions. She focused on the intimate, personal level, the individual families and children whose lives could be transformed by the right support at the right time. Together, they covered a wide range of needs and causes, amplifying each other's impact. As they worked through the calendar, Catherine's phone buzzed with yet another notification. The photographs were still being discussed and shared, the conversation showing no signs of dying down. she glanced at the message and smiled. It was from her mother, Carol Middleton, sending love and congratulations on the positive response.
Carol had been a rock throughout Catherine's illness.
She and Michael, Catherine's father, had stepped in to help with the children whenever needed, providing stability and normalcy during the most difficult months. James, Catherine's brother, had checked in regularly with messages of support. Pippa, her sister, had been a constant source of strength and practical help. Catherine's family was not royal by birth, but they had adapted to their roles with grace and determination. They understood the pressures that came with Catherine's position, and they did everything they could to support her without adding to the burden. The Middletons had become an essential part of the Wales family's support system, bridging the gap between Catherine's origins and her current life. She texted her mother back, thanking her for the kind words and promising to call soon. Even as a princess, even as a future queen, she remained Carol's daughter.
Some bonds could not be altered by titles or circumstances.
The days that followed were busy with preparations for the year ahead. William had several engagements scheduled for the first weeks of January, and he threw himself into them with characteristic energy. Catherine attended some events with him and watched others from home, still building up to a fuller schedule. One of the first major moments of the new year came when Catherine announced that she was now the joint patron of the Royal Marsden, the hospital where she had received her cancer treatment. It was a meaningful connection, a way of giving back to an institution that had done so much for her. In her statement announcing the patronage, she spoke about her relief at being in remission and her focus on continued recovery.
The public response was overwhelmingly positive.
People appreciated that she was using her platform to highlight the work of the NHS and the dedicated healthcare professionals who saved lives every day. They were moved by her willingness to speak openly about her experience, to acknowledge both the challenges and the triumphs of her cancer journey. Behind the scenes, Catherine was also thinking about how to mark the upcoming anniversary of her surgery. It had been nearly a year since that January day when she had gone into the hospital, not knowing what lay ahead. The discovery of cancer, the months of treatment, the long road to recovery. It was a year she would never forget, a year that had changed her in profound and lasting ways. She did not want to dwell on the darkness, but she also did not want to pretend it had not happened. The experience had taught her important lessons about life, about love, about what truly mattered. She wanted to honor that experience while also looking forward to the future with hope and determination. William supported her in finding this balance. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, how the past year had affected her. He had watched her suffer and fight and survive. He had held her through the worst nights and celebrated with her through the best days. He knew that she needed to process the experience in her own way, at her own pace, and he gave her the space to do so. The children, too, played a role in helping Catherine navigate this new chapter. George, especially, had matured significantly during the past year. He understood more about what his mother had been through, and he showed his love in small, thoughtful gestures. A cup of tea brought just when she needed it. A willingness to help with household tasks without being asked. A quiet companionship that spoke louder than words. Charlotte dealt with the stress in her own way, throwing herself into activities and friendships with redoubled energy. She was determined to make her mother smile, and she succeeded more often than not. Her ballet performances, her artistic projects, her running commentary on everything that happened in the family.
Charlotte's personality was like sunshine breaking through clouds.
And Louis, the youngest, remained the family's source of pure joy. At 7, he was old enough to understand that something difficult had happened but young enough to move on from it with the resilience that only children possess. He brought laughter and chaos and endless energy into every room he entered. He reminded his parents, every single day, why life was worth fighting for. As January progressed, the conversations about the New Year's photographs gradually gave way to new topics and new stories. The media moved on to other things, as it always did. But Catherine knew that the impact of their decision to share those candid images would linger. They had shown the world a different side of royal life, a more human and relatable portrait of their family. And, in doing so, they had strengthened the connection between the monarchy and the people it served. One evening, several weeks after the new year, Catherine found herself looking through the photographs again. She had saved them on her phone, along with hundreds of other images from the past year. There were pictures that the public had never seen and never would. Pictures of the children on ordinary days, doing ordinary things. Pictures of family gatherings and quiet moments and silly faces. Pictures that captured the reality of their lives beyond the public gaze. She stopped on a photograph that had not been included in the New Year's post. It showed all five of them, William and Catherine and the three children, piled together on a sofa much like the one in their living room. They were laughing at something, their faces bright with genuine joy. It had been taken during one of Catherine's better days, when the chemotherapy side effects had receded enough for her to participate fully in family life. Looking at the photograph, Catherine could remember exactly how she had felt in that moment. Weak in body but strong in spirit. Surrounded by love in its purest form. Grateful for every second of every day that she got to spend with these four people who meant everything to her. She would keep that photograph private, she decided. It was too precious to share, too intimate to expose to public scrutiny. Some moments belonged only to the people who lived them. But she was glad they had shared the other photographs. She was glad they had given the world a glimpse of their joy and their resilience. Because if their story could inspire even one person to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep believing in the power of love and family, then it was worth any amount of public attention. The new year was well underway now. Catherine could feel herself getting stronger every day, the shadow of illness receding further and further into the past. There would be challenges ahead, she knew. Life did not stop being difficult just because you survived one crisis. But she felt ready to face whatever came next. She had her husband by her side, steady and supportive as always. She had her children, growing and changing and filling her heart with more love than she had thought possible. She had her family, both the one she was born into and the one she had married into. She had her work, the causes and the people that gave her purpose beyond herself. And she had hope. Hope for the future, hope for her health, hope for her children's happiness. Hope that the world could become a better place, one small act of kindness at a time. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. William came into the room and found her still looking at the photographs. He sat down beside her and took her hand, their fingers intertwining in the way that had become second nature over the years. She showed him the picture she had been looking at, the private one of the whole family laughing together. His expression softened as he looked at it, and she saw the same love and gratitude reflected in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had weathered storms and emerged into calmer waters. Two people who knew that the journey was far from over but who were ready to face whatever lay ahead, together. Outside, the winter night had fallen, dark and quiet and peaceful. Inside, the lights of their home glowed warm and welcoming. Somewhere upstairs, their children were sleeping, dreaming their young dreams. And, in the stillness of that moment, Catherine felt absolutely certain that everything was going to be all right. The story of William and Catherine did not begin with photographs or palaces or public announcements. It began in the most ordinary of places, in the most ordinary of ways, with two young people meeting at university and, slowly, tentatively, falling in love. It was September of 2001 when they both arrived at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. William was 19 years old, fresh-faced and nervous despite his royal training. He had spent his whole life in the spotlight, the son of the beloved Princess Diana and the heir to the throne. But, at St. Andrews, he hoped to find something he had never really experienced before. He hoped to find normalcy. Catherine was also 19, a bright and beautiful young woman from a close-knit family in Bucklebury. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, had built a successful party supplies business from nothing, and they had raised their children with a strong work ethic and solid values. Catherine had originally planned to study at Edinburgh, but she had changed her mind at the last minute, drawn to the smaller, more intimate atmosphere of St. Andrews. Whether the decision was purely coincidental or whether the announcement of William's enrollment played any role would become a subject of endless speculation in the years to come. But, whatever the reasons, fate brought them to the same place at the same time. They lived in the same residence hall, St. Salvator's, their rooms not far from each other. They crossed paths in the corridors, at meals, at student events.
At first, they were just acquaintances, two people who happened to be studying at the same university.
William was trying his best to blend in, to be just another student rather than the future king. Catherine was focused on her studies, her art history courses capturing her imagination and her intellect. But something was building between them, even if neither of them fully recognized it at first. There was a connection, a spark, a sense of recognition that went beyond ordinary friendship. The moment that many people point to as the beginning of their romance came in March of 2002, during a charity fashion show. Catherine walked down the runway in a sheer dress over a bikini, and William, watching from the front row, was captivated. He reportedly whispered to his friend that Kate was hot, the first public indication that he saw her as something more than just a fellow student. But the truth was more complicated, as it usually is. Their connection had been developing for months before that fashion show. They had been spending time together, getting to know each other, discovering the shared interests and values that would form the foundation of their relationship. The fashion show was not the beginning.
It was simply one memorable moment in a much larger story.
After their first year in the residence halls, William and Catherine moved into a shared apartment along with two other friends. They were flatmates before they were a couple, living in close quarters and learning each other's habits and quirks.
William cooked for Catherine, or tried to anyway. He would later joke about the disasters that occurred in the kitchen, the burnt dishes and the overcooked pasta. But it did not matter. What mattered was the effort, the care, the desire to do something nice for someone he was coming to care about deeply. Their romance developed slowly, away from the prying eyes of the media. St. Andrews was a small town, and the agreement between the palace and the press meant that William could pursue his education without constant intrusion. It gave him and Catherine the space to get to know each other as ordinary people, not as prince and potential princess. Those years at St. Andrews would become some of the most precious of their lives. They studied together, ate together, went to parties together, did all the things that university students do. They fell in love in the way that young people do, with all the intensity and uncertainty and joy that first love brings. Catherine saw the real William during those years. Not the prince in the tailored suits and the practiced smiles. The young man who worried about his future, who missed his mother, who wanted desperately to be seen for who he was rather than for his title. She accepted him completely, loved him for his flaws as much as his strengths. And William saw the real Catherine. The shy girl who had turned bright red when she first met him. The serious student who worked hard and cared deeply about her education. The loyal friend who could be counted on in any situation. He saw someone who grounded him, who made him feel normal in a world where normal was impossible. They graduated in 2005, both with honors degrees, stepping out of the protective bubble of St. Andrews and into the real world. Their relationship continued, stronger than ever, though it would face new challenges in the years ahead. The media had caught wind of their romance by this point, and Catherine found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never sought. Photographers followed her everywhere. Newspapers speculated about every aspect of her life. She was given the nickname Waity Katie by journalists who wondered when William would propose. It was cruel and unfair, and it took a toll on her. But she endured. She had her family to support her, her friends to lean on, and, most importantly, she had William, who understood better than anyone what it was like to live under constant scrutiny. There was a brief period in 2007 when they broke up. The pressure had become too much, and they both needed space to figure out who they were and what they wanted. It was a painful time, but ultimately a necessary one. When they came back together, they were more certain than ever that they wanted to spend their lives with each other. The proposal came in October of 2010, during a private holiday in Kenya. William got down on one knee and offered Catherine his mother's engagement ring, the stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds that Diana had worn with such grace. Catherine said yes, and a new chapter began. Their wedding on April 29, 2011, was watched by billions of people around the world. Westminster Abbey was filled with royalty and dignitaries, but all eyes were on Catherine as she walked down the aisle in her Alexander McQueen gown. She was radiant, every inch a future queen, and yet somehow she remained the same Kate that William had fallen for all those years ago. The kiss on the balcony of Buckingham Palace became an iconic image, two young people visibly in love at the center of one of the world's great pageants. But, for William and Catherine, the wedding was not about the spectacle. It was about making a commitment to each other, in the presence of their families and friends, that they would face whatever came next together. The years that followed brought joy beyond measure. Prince George was born in July of 2013, a healthy baby boy who would one day be king. Catherine and William stepped out of St. Mary's Hospital with their newborn son, presenting him to the waiting world. It was a moment of pure happiness, the beginning of their family. Princess Charlotte arrived in May of 2015, a beautiful girl who would grow into her own strong personality. And Prince Louis completed their family in April of 2018, a bundle of energy and mischief who would become famous for his expressive reactions at public events. With each child, Catherine and William's love deepened. They learned what it meant to be parents, to put other lives before their own, to experience the fierce protectiveness that comes with caring for something so precious. They made mistakes along the way, as all parents do. But they learned from those mistakes and grew stronger. Their approach to parenting was intentional and thoughtful. They wanted their children to have experiences that went beyond palace walls and royal protocols. They took their kids to the beach, to the park, to ordinary places where they could run and play and just be children. They emphasized kindness and humility, trying to instill values that would serve their children well whether they wore crowns or not. George, as the eldest and the heir to the throne, received special attention to his preparation for public life. But William and Catherine were careful not to burden him too heavily with the weight of his future. They wanted him to have a childhood first, to discover his own interests and develop his own personality before the full responsibilities of royalty descended upon him. Charlotte emerged as the family's spirited middle child, confident and outgoing in ways that delighted her parents. She had a natural flair for public appearances, waving to crowds with the ease of a seasoned royal even at a young age. But, at home, she was simply Charlotte, a girl who loved dancing and horses and spending time with her brothers. Louis was the baby of the family, protected and adored by his siblings and his parents alike. His playful antics at public events became a source of joy for the public, humanizing the royal family in ways that polished photographs never could. When Louis made faces at Trooping the Color or got bored during long ceremonies, people saw not a misbehaving child but a normal kid doing normal kid things. Through all the years of raising their children, William and Catherine remained devoted to each other. Their marriage was a genuine partnership, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They supported each other through the challenges of royal life, through the inevitable conflicts and pressures that came with their positions. They argued, as all couples do, but they worked through their disagreements and emerged stronger on the other side. Their love was not the fairy tale romance that some imagined. It was something more real and more durable than that. It was a love that had been tested by time and by circumstance, that had grown and evolved along with them. It was a love that allowed them to be fully themselves with each other, even when they had to perform for the rest of the world. This history, this foundation of love and commitment, was what made the events of 2024 so devastating and so triumphant. When Catherine was diagnosed with cancer, she and William faced the greatest test of their lives. But they faced it together, as they had faced everything else. William became her primary support, her rock in the storm. He took on additional duties to cover for her absence from public life. He managed the household and the children with help from their families. He held her hand through the difficult nights and celebrated with her through the small victories. Catherine fought with everything she had. She endured the surgery and the chemotherapy, the nausea and the fatigue, the fear and the uncertainty. She drew strength from her husband and her children, from her parents and her siblings, from the countless messages of support that poured in from around the world. The video she released in September, announcing that she had completed chemotherapy, was a testament to her courage and her grace. She spoke honestly about the difficulty of the journey, about the way cancer had brought her face to face with her own vulnerability. But she also spoke of gratitude and hope, of the importance of love and family, of her determination to stay cancer-free and to return to the life she cherished. The public response was overwhelming.
People who had followed her journey from university student to princess to mother were moved by her resilience. They sent messages of love and support, shared their own stories of cancer survival, celebrated her victory as if it were their own. And then came the news in January that she was in remission. The cancer was gone. The worst was over. She could begin to rebuild her life and her health, to return to the work that gave her purpose, to be fully present again with her husband and her children. This was the context that gave the New Year's photographs their power. When William and Catherine shared those 12 images, they were not just posting nice pictures. They were declaring to the world that they had survived. That their family was intact. That hope had triumphed over fear. The photograph of William playing beach volleyball in Brazil, joyful and carefree, showed a man who had carried enormous burdens and still found reasons to smile. The photograph of Catherine at Wimbledon, presenting the trophy with elegance and poise, showed a woman who had fought through illness to reclaim her place in public life. The photograph of King Charles with William and Princess Anne laughing together behind the scenes showed a family united by bonds stronger than any crisis. And the photograph of George with the veterans, young and serious and already so grown up, showed the future. A future where the monarchy would continue, where new generations would carry on the work, where the values of service and duty would be passed down from parent to child. These photographs told a story that words could never fully capture. A story of love that endured through the worst of times. A story of a family that refused to be broken. A story of hope that inspired millions of people around the world. As the new year unfolded, William and Catherine continued to write new chapters of their story. They attended events and supported causes and raised their children with the same dedication they had always shown. They faced new challenges and celebrated new victories. They lived their lives in the public eye while fiercely protecting the private moments that belonged only to them. The bond between them remained as strong as ever. Perhaps stronger, forged in the fire of Catherine's illness and recovery. They had looked into the abyss together and had pulled each other back from the edge. They knew now, more clearly than ever, what really mattered. Not the palaces or the titles or the public adulation. Each other. Their children. The time they had together, however much or little that might be. William often thought about his mother during those months. Diana had faced her own struggles, had known what it was like to be scrutinized and judged and tested. She had not lived to see William find love, to meet Catherine, to hold her grandchildren. But William felt her presence sometimes, especially in the quiet moments. He believed she would have loved Catherine, would have been proud of the woman she had become and the family they had built. Catherine thought about Diana too, about the legacy she had inherited and the example she wanted to set. Diana had used her platform to connect with ordinary people, to bring attention to causes that others ignored, to show that royalty could be about compassion as well as ceremony. Catherine tried to honor that legacy in her own way, bringing her own experiences and perspectives to the work. The sapphire ring on Catherine's finger, the one William had given her when he proposed, was a constant reminder of that connection. It linked her to a woman she had never met but whose influence shaped everything about her life. It reminded her of the responsibility she had taken on and the standards she wanted to uphold. As the months passed and Catherine's strength continued to return, she found herself thinking about the future with renewed optimism. There would be more photographs to take, more memories to make, more moments of joy to share with the people who had supported them so faithfully. There would also be challenges, she knew. Life did not become easy just because you survived one crisis. There would be more tests ahead, more obstacles to overcome, more reasons to lean on each other and on their faith and on their love. But whatever came next, they would face it together. William and Catherine, and George and Charlotte and Louis. A family bound by blood and by choice, by duty and by devotion. A family that had shown the world what it meant to be royal and to be human at the same time. The photographs they had shared at midnight on New Year's Eve would fade from the headlines eventually. New stories would capture the public's attention. New scandals and triumphs and ordinary moments would fill the news cycle. But the love they represented would endure. The hope they symbolized would continue to inspire. The family they had built would keep growing and changing and facing whatever the future held with courage and with grace. This was the true royal treasure. Not the crowns or the jewels or the palaces. Not the titles or the ceremonies or the pageantry. The love of a husband for his wife. The love of parents for their children. The love that had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger than ever. William and Catherine had given the world many gifts over the years. Their service, their dedication, their willingness to share their lives with millions of people. But the greatest gift they gave, the one that touched hearts most deeply, was the example of their love. It was a love story that had begun at a university in Scotland, that had grown through years of dating and marriage and parenthood. It was a love story that had been tested by illness and by loss, by public pressure and by private struggles. And it was a love story that continued to be written, day by day, in the small moments and the grand gestures alike. As Catherine looked at the photographs from their year, as she remembered all they had been through and all they had overcome, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. For William, who had stood by her through everything. For their children, who filled her life with meaning. For the chance to keep living, to keep loving, to keep making memories worth treasuring. The best was yet to come. She believed that with all her heart. And, as long as she had William by her side and her children in her arms, she knew she could face anything. The winter sun was setting over Norfolk, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have made any artist weep with envy. Catherine stood at the window of the living room, watching the light change and feeling a peace that had been hard-won over the past year. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of her family, the murmur of voices and the occasional burst of laughter that was the soundtrack of their daily life. The family had moved to Forest Lodge recently, their new forever home on the Windsor estate. It was larger than Adelaide Cottage, with more room for the children to grow and play, and Catherine had thrown herself into making it feel like theirs. She wanted every room to reflect their personalities, their interests, their love for each other. She wanted it to be a sanctuary, a place where they could retreat from the demands of public life and simply be a family. The move had been timed carefully, coming after the worst of her health crisis was behind her. She had not wanted to uproot the children during such a difficult period, had wanted to maintain as much stability as possible while she was going through treatment. But, now, with her remission confirmed and her strength returning, the time had felt right for a new beginning. William had been supportive throughout the process, as he always was. He understood her need to create a home that felt right, that would serve their family for years to come. He had opinions about some things, of course, but mostly he was happy to let her take the lead. He trusted her judgment and her taste, trusted her to make decisions that would benefit all of them. The children had adapted to the new house with the resilience that characterized their generation. George had carefully arranged his growing collection of books in his new room, creating a space that reflected his increasingly mature interests. Charlotte had immediately claimed a corner near the window as her art space, filling it with paints and easels and half-finished projects. Louis had run through every room at top speed, declaring each one better than the last, before finally settling on which bed he wanted to sleep in. Now, a few weeks into the new year, the house was beginning to feel like home. The boxes were unpacked, the routines were established, and the family had found their rhythm in this new space. Catherine turned from the window as William entered the room. He had been on a call with someone from his office, discussing an upcoming engagement. The work never really stopped for them, even during what were supposed to be quiet family times. There was always something that needed their attention, some cause that required their support, some duty that called them away from domestic life. But they had learned to balance it over the years. They protected their family time fiercely, setting boundaries that allowed them to be present parents even while fulfilling their public roles. It was not always easy, and there were sacrifices that had to be made on both sides. But they believed it was worth it, believed that their children needed them and that they needed their children in return. William came to stand beside her at the window, slipping his arm around her waist. They watched the sunset together in comfortable silence, two people who no longer needed words to communicate. The colors deepened and faded, day giving way to night, and, somewhere in the house, Louis was loudly demanding something from his siblings. Catherine smiled and leaned into William's embrace. These moments of peace were precious, and she had learned not to take them for granted. During her treatment, when she had felt weak and sick and afraid, she had dreamed of moments exactly like this. Standing in a beautiful room in a beautiful home, wrapped in the arms of the man she loved, listening to the chaotic music of her children's voices. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her expression the very picture of patience stretched thin. She informed her parents that Louis was being impossible and George was not helping, and could someone please come and sort things out before she took matters into her own hands. William exchanged an amused look with Catherine and headed off to referee whatever sibling dispute was unfolding. It was a familiar routine, one they had performed countless times over the years. The children bickered and competed, as all children do, but underneath it all was a bond of love that would last their lifetimes. Catherine remained at the window for another moment, enjoying the last traces of sunset. Her mind wandered to the photographs that had captured the public's imagination just weeks before, the candid images from their year that had been shared on New Year's Eve. The response had exceeded all expectations. People from around the world had connected with the images in a way that formal royal portraits never achieved. The photographs showed the Wales family as they really were, not the polished version that appeared on official occasions. They showed joy and spontaneity, love and connection, the ordinary humanity that existed behind the extraordinary circumstances of their lives. Catherine had received countless messages from people who had been moved by the photographs. Cancer survivors who said her openness about her own journey gave them hope. Parents who said the images of her with the children inspired them to cherish their own families. Young people who said William and Catherine's obvious love for each other restored their faith in relationships. It was humbling, really, the impact that a few photographs could have. Catherine had learned over the years that her position gave her a platform that could be used for good, that her visibility could shine a light on causes and issues that might otherwise go unnoticed. But she had not fully understood, until her cancer journey, just how powerful simple honesty could be. When she had released that video in September, announcing the end of her chemotherapy, she had spoken from the heart. She had shared her fears and her gratitude, her sense of vulnerability and her renewed appreciation for life. The response had been overwhelming, millions of people connecting with her words in a deeply personal way. The New Year's photographs continued that tradition of authenticity. They showed the Wales family not as distant figureheads but as real people with real relationships and real experiences. They bridged the gap between royalty and the public, creating a sense of connection that transcended traditional boundaries. Catherine moved away from the window and went to find her family. She discovered them in the playroom, where William was attempting to negotiate a peace treaty between Louis and his siblings. The specific grievance had something to do with a video game, though the details were unclear and probably not that important in the grand scheme of things. She settled into a chair and watched her husband work his diplomatic magic. He was good at this, at calming conflicts and finding common ground. It was a skill that served him well in his royal duties, but it had been honed first in the trenches of family life. Managing 3 strong-willed children required patience and creativity, and William had developed both in abundance. Eventually, a compromise was reached, and the children dispersed to their various activities. Louis headed off to practice his bicycle riding in the long hallways, a habit that Catherine knew she should probably discourage but could not quite bring herself to forbid. Charlotte returned to her art project, humming softly to herself as she worked. George retreated to his room with a book, perfectly content to spend the evening in solitary reading. William collapsed into the chair beside Catherine, pretending to be exhausted from his peacekeeping efforts. She laughed and reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in the way that had become second nature over their years together. They talked about the upcoming weeks, the engagements and events that filled their calendars. Catherine was gradually taking on more public duties, building up to a schedule that would eventually match her pre-illness workload. Each appearance was carefully planned, with attention paid to her energy levels and her need for recovery time. She had visited the Royal Marsden, the hospital where she had received her cancer treatment, and had announced her new role as joint patron. It was a meaningful connection, a way of giving back to an institution that had done so much for her. She wanted to use her experience to raise awareness about cancer care, to advocate for better support for patients and their families, to ensure that others facing similar journeys had access to the resources they needed. William supported her completely in this work. He understood that her cancer experience had changed her, had given her new priorities and new perspectives. He encouraged her to channel those